Okay. So, I guess I'm in charge here.
Charge yourself first.
So, let me get to the...
You would like to start the session 1. This session, the chairperson is Professor Carl Arms.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
No.
Is this on?
I think there's something at the top. Yeah, that's right there.
No.
No?
There. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, welcome to the first session of papers, and I'm very delighted to be here and to start off with the first paper myself, but we have 4 papers. Unfortunately, Professor Osman Nuri Küçük is not feeling well, and so Dr. Osman is going to read his paper instead. So, shall we begin? Perhaps we could have the light back up in the front a little bit. Can we have some light at the front table? That's good. Oh, it's either all lights or no lights? Can you, all right. Is the PowerPoint ready to go? Ah, okay.
1 minute, please.
Okay. 1 minute. 1 minute, please. The test, okay. All right, so let's show the... So before we begin, I'd just like to remark, I'd like to thank our hosts for organizing this remarkable event, and everyone from Istanbul to Kyoto. I think it's a great opportunity for us to share ideas and dramatic lighting sequences as well. There, that's a nice compromise, perhaps. Let's see if that works. Is the PowerPoint available? Can we show the first slide?
Closer.
Okay, right. Okay, well, this is going to be primarily print and a few pictures on the slide, so I think we can go ahead. And you will notice that Dr. Toranaga began by some questions about methodologies and definitions, and I'm going to take us back to an era of early formulations about what later became known as Sufism, but this is the earliest phases of European accounts of the religious practices of the dervishes. One of the major issues in religious studies over the past few centuries is how to conceptualize the diverse aspects of Islam, which all too often has been placed into an oppositional relationship with European Christianity and something called the West in general. Okay. A key part of this understanding was the effort to understand what we now call Sufism, which I will call tentatively a tradition of ethical and spiritual practice found throughout Muslim societies and beyond. Now, some years ago in the publication that was referenced, in fact 20 years ago, I drew attention to the formation of the term and concept of Sufism in the early phase of British Orientalism in India, under the guidance of figures like Sir William Jones and Sir John Malcolm. This was very much an example of the Enlightenment classification of religious isms. The identification of Sufism was therefore a category that was tied to hostility against Islam, and it demonstrated a conviction that all Oriental mysticism, a relatively new term, which has a history that needs to be discussed as well, all Oriental mysticism was supposed to be derived from India. In these studies produced at the end of the 18th and beginning of the 19th century, Sufism was defined as separate from Islam and was generally assumed to derive from some other source, generally Indian. Yet there were previous European encounters with Sufis prior to the creation of the term Sufism. And these too have played an important role in the conceptualization of this category of religion. And this is an academic category. Early travelers who spent years in India and Persia had recourse to a vocabulary that explicitly compared Sufis either to Christian monks or to marginal religious groups in contemporary Europe, particularly the Quietist movement, which had been declared heretics by the Catholic Church. At the same time, these writers anticipated British Orientalists in assuming the fundamental identity between Sufi doctrines and Hindu teachings, which were often equated with Greek philosophy as well. The Orientalist scholarly literature that emerged in the 17th and 18th centuries in the form of dictionaries, encyclopedias, and manuscript catalogs also took much the same approach. A survey of these materials reveals the long extent of this attempt to categorize the Sufis, and it also reveals a sharp ambivalence that was defined in terms of the major debates that were taking place in Europe. Travelers, relying on their own experience, but also combined with the reading of writings by previous travelers, which they frequently copied, often expressed contempt and disgust for the unconventional dervishes that they encountered in public. And they were quick to announce the similarities they observed among Sufis, yogis, and other ascetics. In contrast, the emerging scholars who had access to writings in Arabic, Persian, and Turkish sometimes formulated more positive evaluations of Sufis in terms of Christian categories, such as mystical theology, spirituality, and monasticism. But in all these cases, Europeans struggled to conceptualize Sufism as a religious group by applying to them European categories, which, despite their limitations, often persist today in a remarkably resilient fashion. Now, I actually have a much longer paper than I can present today, so I'm going to concentrate on two accounts of the French travelers Bernier and Chardin, and then quickly just give you a list of some of the later figures that are worth discussing, because I think that these resources from the 17th and 18th century have not been examined for a long time, but they still exert a spell of enchantment over the categories that we use today. So if we can go to the first slide. And this is the outline, and you can see how much material there is, and I'm not going to get to. So I'll concentrate on part one. The first account of the Sufis I'd like to discuss comes from the French intellectual François Bernier, who spent over a decade in India between 1658 and 1669, serving the Mughal nobility as a physician. I should add, as a side comment, that his training as a physician was very unusual. He took a 3-month short course in France, one of the conditions of which was that the graduates should not practice medicine within France. So I do not recommend this medical school. Now, Bernier was a student of the philosopher Gassendi, a now forgotten rival to René Descartes. And Bernier, in fact, edited his teacher's writings. He claims, in addition, that he spent 5 years translating into Persian the writings of both Descartes and Gassendi for the use of his employer, the Mughal official Danishmand Khan. Now, Bernier expressed his views on the Sufis in a lengthy letter to Monsieur Chapelain, composed in Shiraz in 1667, and first published in Paris in 1671. And by the way, most of these publications are available in online versions, and so the research on this has become much easier. And here, next slide, please. We don't have a picture of Bernier, but we have one of Chapelain. Now, this letter is remarkable because the main subject matter is described as follows: touching upon the superstitions, strange manners of acting, and doctrine of the Hindus or Gentiles of Hindustan. In other words, not only are the Sufis placed among the exotic and bizarre sites of the Orient, but also they are unconnected to Islam. They only come to mind in connection with the group that inevitably comes to mind when the Sufis are mentioned, the yogis. The yogis are introduced using the pronunciation jogi as those who are believed to be true illuminated saints and perfect yogis or perfectly united with God. Bernier uses this language from Christian monasticism to describe the yogis, saying many have convents, they are governed by superiors, where vows of chastity, poverty, and submission are made. This is language taken from Christianity. But he is horrified in general by the appearance of these naked fakirs, hideous to behold. Bernier's disapproval of nakedness includes a brief contemptuous reference to Sarmad, the unconventional Sufi who was executed in 1661. He notes with skepticism the meditative practice of the yogis, and it is clearly in such techniques and their esoteric character that he locates the similarity with the Sufis. He says that the trance, and he uses the French term ravissement, and the means of enjoying it form the grand mystery of the Cabal of the yogis, as well as of the Sufis. I call it mystery because they keep these things secret among themselves. Incidentally, if you compare the French and English versions of Bernier, the term Cabal disappears from the English translation for some reason. Bernier acknowledged, let me pass over this. The choice of language is striking. The term Cabal is derived from Kabbalah, the name for the Jewish mystical tradition, and it has implications of esoteric secrecy, to be sure. At the same time, Cabal in European circles also carried the connotation of a rebellion against authority by implication revolutionary. For Bernier, the phrase mystery and cabal was dismissive, and he elsewhere applied it to astrology, which he dismissed as a superstition. In any case, Bernier concludes his account of the Sufis, already colored by the views of a Hindu pundit. He got some of his information about the Sufis from a Hindu scholar, with a description of a lively debate over the immanence of God in the world. And he says, inasmuch as certain pundits or pagan doctors, meaning Hindu scholars, had instilled it into the minds of Prince Dara and Sultan Shoja, the elder sons of Shah Jahan. So he's blaming the Hindu scholars for whatever beliefs had become widespread among the Mughal nobility and ruling class. He observes that practically the entire Orient has embraced the notion of God pervading all things. And he says, this is the almost universal doctrine of the pagan pundits of India. And it is this same doctrine which is still present in the cabal of the Sufis and most of the literary figures of Persia, and which is set forth in Persian poetry in very exalted and emphatic language in their Gulchen Raz, or Garden of Mysteries. The poetry that Bernier cites in this passage is the well-known Persian treatise by Mahmud Shabastari, the Gulchen Raz, or Rose Garden of Mystery, an extremely popular Sufi text that is commonly viewed as expressing the metaphysics of Ibn Arabi. As part of a rising tide of Enlightenment philosophers, Bernier is dismissive of this doctrine, which he equates with the opinion of the alchemist Robert Fludd, which his great Gassendi has so ably refuted, and he finds it worthless. Bernier portrays this position as based only on empty figures of speech, devoid of logic. Although he presents the details of the argument in Hindu terms with Sanskrit vocabulary, Bernier appears to be unfamiliar with the history of the Sufi ideas that are behind Gulchen Raz, viewing it instead as interchangeable with Hindu teachings. And he concludes with a grimly sardonic summary. I would ask, in allusion to all this, do you not think I have reason to take as a motto to this letter the wretched fruit of so many voyages and so many reflections, a motto of which the modern satirist has so well known how to catch and convey the idea without such a long journey, namely, there are no opinions too extravagant and ridiculous to find reception in the mind of man. It's hard to imagine a more negative conclusion about the character of Sufi doctrines. Now, I see I've already taken, I have to be hard on myself as the chair of the session, and so I'm going to keep myself in the boundaries. So I will not read the full account of Jean Chardin. Can we have the next slide, please? But here you can see a portrait of Jean Chardin looking very much like the master of the universe and his voyages. He was a jewel merchant who went to Persia just a little bit after Bernier was traveling. And in fact, they met in India briefly. And so he has a chapter on the Sufis in his section on the philosophy of the Persians. And he says lots of things which are very similar. They get all their teachings from Pythagoras, but it's also pretty much the same as they're called a cabal. I wonder if they shared their notes together, Bernier and Chardin. And he also talks about the Gulchen Raz as the key text to understand Sufi doctrine. But there's more there that is quite amazing. And overall, what I would like to emphasize is the harsh negative tone of the observations of these travelers. It is dignified by a certain amount of reference to classical philosophy and theological terms, but it is extremely negative. Now, the last thing about these figures before I do a quick review of some of the other sources is to return to the notion of the Quietists. He refers to the Iluminados of Spain, the Molinistas of Italy, and the Quietists of France. These are groups which had all been declared heretical by the Catholic Church. So when the Sufis are placed in the same category, this is not an innocent description. It is an extremely negative characterization. And in fact, he even hints that the Sufis are responsible for the spread of Quietism in Spain and southern Europe, and it's a kind of polemical thing. So, and Bernier, in fact, wrote an article about Quietism in France and how it needed to be suppressed. So these are, again, they're not innocent terms, they're very charged with negativity. Now, let's just go back to the slides, and I'll show you some of the other sources. This is D'Herbelot, who is the author of the great compendium called the Bibliothèque Orientale, which promises to tell you everything you want to know about the Orient in every category. It was published in the early 1690s and again in 1787. And it's a fantastic encyclopedia which has all kinds of material in it. And here we find, for instance, under the word Sophie, that we have to go back to the Greeks. This is one of the first examples of connecting Sufi to the Greek word sophos, a connection which I find philologically implausible. But from another point of view, from a polemical point of view, it makes a lot of sense. And there's also works like the trilingual Key to the Persian Language by a Carmelite monk named Saint Joseph, who was in Persia in the 1670s. And this has definitions in Italian, French, and Latin of a lot of Persian language terms, but there are fascinating differences between what he says in European languages and what he says in the Persian section. For instance, when he says really nasty things about the dervishes in Islam, you have to go to the European section to find out what his real opinions are. We also find early publications like Miguel Kasiri, or as he was also known, Mikhail al-Ghaziri, a Lebanese Christian who cataloged in 2 volumes in Latin the Arabic manuscripts in the Escorial Library in Spain. There, for instance, we find that Ibn Arabi is referred to as Sufitarum Monachorum Praefectus, the leader of the Sufi monks. So Sufitus is the Latin term which was developed as a way of talking about the Sufis. Or also we have the remarkable work produced in 1787 by an Armenian dragoman, Mouragia Dossan, called the Tableau Général de l'Empire Ottoman. A comprehensive, systematic look at the Ottoman Empire. Professor Carter Findley, who is emeritus at Ohio State, has promised a massive study of this text is coming out next year, and I think we can all look forward to that. He has written that the section on the dervishes in this text, this is all in French, 1787, very interesting time. He has remarked in print that the section on the dervishes is very weak. And he blames this on the fact that Dossan did not have his papers with him in France when he wrote this section. But it's about 75 pages long, and then it's accompanied by many remarkable illustrations of the rituals of the different dervish orders. And just a few other quick ones. In the translation of Hayya bin Yaqzan, that appeared in London in 1708, we find a footnote referring to the doctrine of the Sufians, which again compares them to the Quietists and the Quakers being a Protestant marginal group. And in a catalog of manuscripts brought back from India by James Fraser, we find under the Lavayeh of Jami, there's a manuscript in this catalog. It's called a book about the Tasawwuf religion, or Tasawwuf, or Eastern Quietism. So you can see how these terms begin to circulate. And encyclopedias, popular works, this one has an article by the great translator of the Quran, George Sale, uses some of the same terminology. So I think it would be very helpful if we could get a comprehensive inventory of the references to Sufis in different forms to see what are the terms that were being used, to what extent did they have an ideological agenda. That's basically the presentation. We have a dossier here of the prehistory of the encounters between Europeans and the dervishes of the East. What were the terms that they used? That is the question that I'm asking, and it's a project that needs some collaborative research so that we can carry this forward and see what its implications are. So thank you very much. And now it's my pleasure to request Sachiko Murata to talk to us about Sufism in Chinese.
Thank you.
I guess we can have the lights back.
Yes, so Carl Ernst has just spoken and has written extensively about the problems connected with using the word Sufism. Those of us who continue using the word often do so because there is no real alternative. Words like mysticism, esotericism, or spirituality are both too vague and too full of irrelevant connotations. In any case, this is not the debate I want to revisit. I simply want to point out that when we study Chinese text on Islam, the word Sufi or Tasawwuf is never used, nor there is any Chinese equivalent. So does this mean that Sufism was ignored? That conclusion would give far too much credit to the word itself. The fact is that Sufism, understood in a broad sense as a certain approach to Islamic knowledge and practice, plays a major role in Chinese language Islam. Today I want to look at the first book written in Chinese by Muslim scholar, the Real Commentary on the True Teaching by Wan Dayu, which was published in 1642. Modern-day historians and the Chinese Muslim community have recognized this book as a classic statement of the Islamic tradition in Chinese, the benchmark against which later texts could be measured. Historians and anthropologists have made clear that various Sufi orders became established in China, but there is no concrete evidence suggesting that Wan Dayu and other early authors who followed him, like Liu Qi, were affiliated with any orders. Nonetheless, practically, their only identified source of the Quran and Hadith are texts written by Sufi teachers like Najmuddin Razi, Aziz Nasafi, and Abdurrahman Jan. Wan Dayu wrote his book as explication of the basic teachings of the religion in a manner that can be understood by educated Chinese-speaking Muslims. What set his book apart from similar works in the Islamic language is that it uses practically no Arabic words and derives its technical terminology from Neo-Confucian tradition. The book's readers, as educated Chinese, would have some familiarity with the so-called three teachings, that is, Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. The one that you adopt the terminology from three teachings, he made it very clearly that Islamic teaching provides the straight path of understanding and practice. Wanda's commentary can best be compared to books like Mirsad Ebad by Razi, a book that attempts to present its teachings in a relatively non-technical language. Mirsad Ebad was in fact the first Islamic book to be translated into Chinese 28 years after one's book published. And it remained one of the most important textbooks in the Chinese madrasas down into the 20th century. Both Razi and Wan emphasized the rationale behind Islamic teaching, that is, need to undergo a transformation of the soul in order to achieve personal engagement with God. My understanding of Sufism is that it is a convenient word to designate an approach to the religion that set out to explain the inner meanings behind external forms. Among all Muslim scholars, three teachers were most adept at penetrating received mode of expression and explaining the significance to their audience, often without recourse to the standard expression in the transmitted learning. In this respect, they stood in marked contrast to the jurist, whose role has been to clarify the precise details of activity as delineated by the Quran and Sunnah. For the jurist, the basic issue was always how to do things correctly. But as Islam split regions more distant from the center in space and time, the need to explain why became much more pronounced. This need was especially strong in China, where Muslims were faced with a civilization with great powers of assimilation, and where fewer and fewer people were able to master Persian and Arabic. To give you a sense of why I see Wanda's book as thoroughly colored by Sufi teachings, let me describe briefly three important themes: the cosmic role of human beings, the structure of the human self, and the path of achieving virtue. Wanda addresses human perfection from two basic standpoints: as a pattern upon which the universe was created, and as a goal of human existence. Broadly speaking, this is a doctrine of the origin and the return, a teaching that gives structure to religious nature and principle in Islam, though one does not develop it in nearly the same detail. This same doctrine is the topic of Razi's book, the full title of which is Mirsad Ebad min al-Mabda ila al-Ma'ad, the path of God's servant from origin to return. In explaining the root of human perfection, one uses the important Neo-Confucian doctrine of the three ultimate. These are called the non-ultimate, the great ultimate, and the human ultimate. Neo-Confucian scholars understood the non-ultimate to designate reality in its non-manifesting state before the appearance of the universe. The great ultimate then designate ultimate reality in as much as it can be understood as the origin of all the forms that constitute the manifest universe. Thus, Wanda is right, the non-ultimate is the beginning of formlessness in heaven, earth, and the media things, and the great ultimate is the beginning of form in heaven and earth, and the media things. As for the human ultimate, he is a perfect human being, the microcosm, who has integrated the whole of reality and achieved the final goal of human existence. Outwardly, his bodily form embraces all the forms of macrocosm, and inwardly, his spiritual reality is united with pure formlessness. At the beginning, the human ultimate, the seed of everything in the universe, and at the end, he is a fruit of all that comes into existence. To a large extent, one's description of human nature derives from similar discussions in Islamic text. He translates the Arabic word ruh or spirit into Chinese as xin, a word that takes on Chinese religion philosophy typically translated as nature. Hence, a hierarchy of soul or spirit that is commonly discussed in Sufism and Islamic philosophy is presented as hierarchy of natures. One writes, for example, that the lowest level, which is the basal spirit, is called the nature of begetting. The middle level is animal spirit, which is called the nature of awareness. The highest level, the human spirit, is called nature of the spiritual. One typically discusses nature as tightly bound up with mandate, an important notion in Confucian thought. Neo-Confucian scholars often explain the relationship between nature and mandate with a view toward the first sentence of Confucian classics, the doctrine of the mean, I quote, "But heaven mandate is nature, following nature is the Tao," unquote. One and others interpreted mandate as a divine command, a notion that Muslim scholars generally divide into two. First is a creative command, or word be, which brings the universe into existence. Second is a religious command, which addresses human free will. The first sentence of the doctrine of mean can mean that all levels of nature result from the creative command. Then the Tao, or the way to human perfection, is to follow the religious command back to its source. In other words, Tao of heaven and earth, which is nothing but the way in which reality unfolds, demands human engagement. Before all else, such engagement asks people to dominate over the dispersive tendencies inherent in the basal and animal natures. Only then can they actualize the nature of the spiritual and achieve the true human state. In talking about the way of cultivating human self, one frequently refers to the importance of heart, which accepting to the Quran and Sufi tradition. The heart is the center of the self and the set of intelligence. In translation Chinese classics, the equivalent Chinese word xin is typically rendered as mind. Sufi texts like the quote hadith about the heart as embraced God. They use expressions like the folk of the heart to refer to those who have achieved the high station on path to God. One comments on this well-known hadith from Bukhari. I quote, "There is in the body a lump of flesh. When it is sound, the whole body is sound, and when it is corrupt, the whole body is corrupt. Indeed, it is the heart," unquote. One explains the meaning in terms that, following mainstream Sufi and Chinese teachings, I quote, "The sovereign king has responsibility for all under heaven. The district magistrate has responsibility for one area. The head of family has responsibility for one family. Someone who lives alone has a responsibility for his own body. Although all these are equal in responsibility, of most concern are the people and the things of your own body, for they are the most important root. The heart is the lord ruler of the whole body. Intention, deliberation, memory, and wakefulness are among its close attendants. Seeing, hearing, smelling, and speaking are its ministers of state. The 4 limbs and 100 members are its people and things. The whole of this body is one country. If the heart is unjust, then the whole body will be unjust. If the heart is true, then the whole body will be true. How can this be a small affair?" Unquote. In Chinese thought, one needs to follow the Tao in order to achieve human perfection, which establishes harmony between heaven and earth. As Wei likes to put it, the goal of the Confucian tradition is to teach people how to be human. In the ontological terms that one Dai often employs, learning how to be human demands rootedness in the nature of the spiritual, that is the human spirit that has grown into Adam at his creation. This spiritual nature is characterized by intelligence, self-awareness, and the ability to see into the principles that govern the universe. One takes it for granted that the process of becoming fully human established what the Confucian tradition calls the five constants. That is, the virtues, humanness, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, and faithfulness. Discussion of these virtues in Chinese texts runs parallel to Islamic discussion of Quranic virtue and the character trait. The most important of five virtues, the one that embraces all, is Ren, humanness. Scholars have translated Ren in a variety of ways, trying to catch the range of the connotations of the word: benevolence, perfect virtue, human-heartedness, love, benevolent love, goodness, altruism, co-humanity, true manhood. If I had to translate into Arabic, I would choose the word ihsan, beautiful doing, which catches a range of meaning and plays a similar role in the Quran, where it designates the foundation of all human good. This having said, it is necessary to be pointed out that one sticks to the mainstream of Islamic moral teachings when he ascribes all of the five constants to the real Lord. Ghazali, among others, describes human perfection becoming characterized by the character trait of God. Much of the discussion of the virtue in Islamic texts designate them with words that also designate divine attributes such as wisdom, compassion, justice, love, forgiveness, generosity, clemency, patience, and beautiful doing. The Quran calls God as a beautiful doer and says in 5 verses that God loves the beautiful doers. Thus, we should not be surprised that one ascribes humanness to God, as in the passage, I quote, "The real Lord is utmost humanness, who made the classic descent and sent the sage to guide the republic to the path," unquote. If I had chosen to render Ren as benevolence, the sentence would not sound odd, nor would the following statement, which sums up the common Islamic notion that the true human status can only be achieved when someone becomes characterized by God's character trait. I quote, "Were there no complete human beings, there would be no one to embody the utmost humanness of the real Lord," unquote. In keeping with Sufi text generally, one holds the way to embody the utmost humanness of the real Lord is overcome and conquer the limitation of one's own self, the nafs, a teaching that is in perfect alignment not only with Sufi tradition, but also with Confucians. Several times in text one speaks of conquering the self. The source of his expression is a word of Confucius: to conquer self and return to propriety is humanness. In typically, a passage one writes, the quote, "The most important thing in which to exert effort is conquering self. Although conquering self and having self are the same in form and appearance, they are far distant from each other in right and wrong. One is good and the other evil. How is it possible for you not to discriminate between the two?" Unquote. Conquering self leads to the state of having self, for one, the goal of the Confucian activity known as cultivating the body is to achieve no self, a common Buddhist expression. Here he is recalling one of the major themes of Sufi literature, perhaps mostly famous expressing in terms of word fana, annihilation. In one passage, he explains the central importance of overcoming self while connecting it with another frequent theme, that is knowing oneself. He writes, I quote, "Although there are many sorts of good and evil, each has one root. The root of good is born from knowing self, and the root of evil emerges from not knowing self. Knowing self is to become no self, and becoming no self is to demean self and to be modest. Not knowing self to have self, and having self to honor self and to be arrogant." In just quoting a passage, one interprets no self in moral and ethical terms. Let me finish by quoting one more passage in which describes the final goal of the path in language that recalls the Sufi discussion of the perfect human being, near Confucian depiction of the sage and the Buddhist and Taoist description of Buddha's immortals. In referring to the three teachings, he uses one of his favorite expressions. Buddhist strives to see thusness, near Confucian wants to achieve the great ultimate, and Taoist tries to open the gate of all subtleties. As for the Muslim, I quote, "When they think again about the origin, They will quickly search for the path to go home. They will mold feelings and desires as to act in keeping with the principle of heaven. They will transform the mirror images so as to take them back to emptiness and non-being. This is the return of the true heart. This is a very moment of seeing vastness, perfecting the great ultimate, opening the gate of all subtleties, and attaining the way of being a non-being. This is what is meant by saying that no one can advance beyond the true real, about which is nothing. If you want to advance one step further, you must tear away the curtain of darkness, pierce and crush the circle of great ultimate, and break and smash the great gate of all subtleties. Then you will go beyond the way of sweet teachings. Outside this way is a house that people do not discern, for they are searching lazily for the nest inside the way. If you can once again obtain the nest and arrive at this house, you will suddenly return to the no heart. When you return to the no heart, the fountainhead of the mandate will become manifest, and you will attain the non-ultimate. When you embody the non-ultimate and recognize the real road, that is the utmost return. Thank you.
So, Dr. Osman, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good afternoon. We are very happy to be here, and we thank our hosts, the Japanese friends, for having us. To bring human beings together and to raise them to a higher spiritual level, we need many, many bridges of knowledge and love. I'm indeed honored to have walked on one of those bridges built by Kyoto University and the Kerim Foundation. I'm also honored to be in the presence of my spiritual murshid, Hazreti Kenan Rifai. I will read a paper written by Professor Küçük, so all the knowledge and wisdom belongs to him, and all the pronunciation mistakes are mine. The subject is the epistemological problem of contemporary Islamic thought. This presentation is on how we perceive the religion of Islam, in other words, the levels of our knowledge about religion. It's an attempt to consider the epistemology of Islamic thought. I can explain the need for such a topic as follows. While what we call Islam may point to a single thing based on its sources, Islamic thought has an hierarchic structure. Due to this difference of perception and hierarchy, Quran speaks of a dimensional distinction among Islam and Iman, faith. The Bedouin say in Quran, we have attained to faith. And the God says, say unto them, you have not yet attained to faith. You should rather say, we have outwardly surrendered, for true faith has not yet entered your hearts. From one perspective, Islam encompasses all the levels of religion, including faith. But based on how the religion's interlocutor, which is the human, grasps the hierarchic structure appears within religion. The famous Gabriel Hadith puts forth the place of this in religious tradition as Islam, Iman, and Ihsan, which is beneficence. Although we cannot consider these levels independently of each other, it cannot be said that all three levels are the same. If we are to use this hierarchy from the Gabriel Hadith in classifying the epistemology of Islamic thought, what do we see? Our presentation is an attempt to classify the hierarchy of our knowledge about religion. This classification may also be termed a theory of epistemology on the relations between religion's essence and its appearance. Let us briefly remember the hadith. Speaking with the Prophet Muhammad, Gabriel asked about Islam, Iman, and ihsan. For the first two, the Prophet Muhammad responded with the principles that are known today as the pillars of Islam and Iman. Ihsan he defined as worshipping as if seeing God. After the departure of the questioner, the Prophet Muhammad reveals that was Gabriel come to teach the religion. In this well-known dialogue, while ihsan is regarded as the highest level, it is also the core that shelters the essence of religion. Religion without ihsan loses its essential function. While bringing religion into our social life, to be able to penetrate into the dimension of ihsan is difficult. This is why religion's characteristics gain precedence. As a result, an Islam, Iman, Ihsan hierarchy appears. We live in the 21st century and evaluate events from our frame of perception. Evaluating religion based on our perceptions of today could lead us to a limited recognition. Therefore, I will attempt to formulate a hypothesis by keeping 14 centuries of Islamic thought tradition in mind. In order to render the depiction more illustrative, I will also give space to some Muslim thinkers. Let us consider the topic over the human as the interlocutor of religion. The human is one and whole based on its nature. But when considering the human in terms of relations with others, we come across communication and a hierarchy that comes from that. Communicating through words, feelings, intentions, and the subconscious can be given as examples of the hierarchy of communication. In our case, the equivalent of human and communication in this paper is religion and tabligh, which is edicts. Although religion by essence is one, the hierarchy appears when it comes to religion's edicts. We can evaluate this situation over the following verse. Call thou all mankind unto thy sustainer's path with wisdom and goodly exhortation, and argue with them in the most kindly manner, from Quran. According to the verse above, there are 3 levels to invitation: wisdom, goodly exhortation, and kind argumentation. While at first glance these may look like separate levels, their appearance from the Prophet is such that they are each built on wisdom. We can say that there is a differentiation in the other side's understanding. According to this, 1, invitation through wisdom; 2, wisdom and goodly exhortation; 3, wisdom and kind argumentation. An argument without wisdom cannot be spoken of. Thus, wisdom is the indispensable part of all 3 levels. In other words, the argumentation and exhortation of a sage person who is also hakim, wise, is done with wisdom. If we are to consider this jointly with the Gabriel hadith, we can say the following. The Prophet, relaying the religion, bases everything he does on the level of ihsan, in other words, on wisdom. But for those who will be unable to discern this depth in his discourse, this matter will be conveyed in an outside to inside hierarchy, where what is most easily understood will be shown first. While all the arguments and exhortations by prophets are done through wisdom, one of those of the one who is not hakim are invitations who have lost their wisdom. Ghazali lists wisdom alongside fiqh, ilm, tawhid, tashir among terms that have been corrupted under his heading of disciplines who have lost their functionality. The concepts that are mentioned can be evaluated as indicators of the fact that the Islamic world faced the same troubles 9 centuries ago as it does today. Ghazali writes that the concept of wisdom which is praised in Quran and Hadiths, has lost its value due to incorrect use. When we apply the hierarchy for religion mentioned above in the Gabriel Hadith to the epistemology of Islamic thought, the term that is equivalent to ihsan, which is at the station of being the core of religion, is hikmah, wisdom. For this reason, I will consider the relation of Islamic thought and wisdom in my presentation. The key term in this paper will be wisdom, hikmah. Mentioned multiple times in the Quran, wisdom is something that is mentioned as being bestowed on prophets along with the book. In this sense, if we are to consider the book as a phenomena, wisdom is the sagacity to understand and apply that phenomena. A book that has not found its wisdom cannot be correctly understood or applied. In Islamic thought, one who is not a prophet may also have wisdom. The Quran says the following on this topic: whoever is granted wisdom has indeed been granted wealth abundant, but none bears this in mind save those who are endowed with insight. We cannot fully define hikmah in any language because hikmah cannot be defined independent of the sage person who is hakim. Wisdom can be speaking out or remaining silent, as the case may require. Wisdom is determined by the manner of the hakim person. Jurjani defines wisdom in the following manner in his Al-Tarifat, where he considers Quranic terms, a discipline searching for the reality of the existential nature of things in proportion to the human's capacity. Jurjani refers to wisdom being something that is only partially defined in the following way. Wisdom is a theoretical discipline that is not directly tied to any instrument. Wisdom also has the meaning of bringing forth something new, inventing. Wisdom in itself is what is true, and everyone takes of it depending on their capacity. According to this, wisdom is a noun that differentiates based on the level of the person. This depiction by Jurjani fits wisdom's function as well. We can explain this method from the perspective of its relation with religion as follows. Religion by its nature has an essence that is not hierarchic, but a hierarchy appears when relaying religion to society. Depth in any area of Islamic thought depends on that area being taken up based on its influence at the level of wisdom. In this sense, we can demonstrate the hierarchy of knowledge for Islamic thought as in a triangle, wisdom in the bottom, knowledge in the middle, and information at the top. Nakil, transmitted information, is having some information about the basic element of knowledge at the level of news and rumors. So long as connections are not drawn among this information and something new produced, it remains at the level of information. We can apply this description given above to all disciplines, ranging from the social to the physical sciences. Disciplines on Islamic thought are included in this as well. For example, knowing Islam's required and recommended religious duties, meaning information on catechistic religion, or the reasons behind the descent of the words in the Quran, their historical background, or their Arabic linguistic specifications, are all types of information. If we were to consider this from a historian's perspective, knowing that the Second World War occurred between the years of 1939 and 1945 is information. It is information that is transferred as news, ahbar. Those of old use the term malumat furush, that is someone who sells information, to emphasize that information at this level is only the outer frame, and also to criticize those who do not go beyond this level. The data that we upload to computers are of the information kind. They are transferred knowledge. But from the perspective of the terminology of Islamic thought, we cannot call a computer an alim, a scholar. We can only use this title for the one who gives the commands to the computer to forge connections between specific data, meaning the one who provides the style of communication, the one who builds bridges. Therefore, what separates knowledge from information and intellect from transfer is the capacity to form linkages. When the connection among information that seems unrelated at first is made, this information rises to the level of knowledge in. This is why, in an age where access to information is so easy, we are still experiencing an informatics ignorance. The following paradox appears on this topic. It seems as if you have much information about a topic, but the information you have paradoxically increases your ignorance about this topic. This situation must have been realized in the past as well as the Quran versus the expression for those who have information during Moses' time, quote, an ass that carries a load of books but cannot benefit from them, unquote. Ghazali uses the term awam, common, 9 centuries ago in this sense. In his Iljam al-Awam, where he discusses this term, Ghazali uses it to refer to those who are not educated about a certain subject, as well as for those who have been educated but cannot progress beyond information on that topic. When one establishes certain connections between the information one has, knowledge is born. This is why British philosopher Francis Bacon says knowledge is power, rather than information is power. Every new knowledge that is created has been formed through building connections. Since information is already known, it is simple transfer, something that everyone can reach and thus not of the level of knowledge. In any topic, information is the means by which we reach knowledge. In Islamic thought, this means came to be taken for knowledge itself, which increases informatics ignorance of Islamic thought. In this sense, we can remember that the Sufi tradition criticizes the information of the ulama as the transmitted, dead information of the dead, and refers to it as rusum, duties, or as zahir, outer, and describes true information as knowledge that must come from within. The reasons behind the corruption of the terms Ghazali lists, namely fiqh, ilm, tawhid, tazkir, and hikmah, can be evaluated in the following manner in connection with our topic. Every term has regressed from the level of knowledge to the level of information. Therefore, us possessing information about the topic of Islam does not necessarily make us scholars. This is one of the fundamental problems of Islamic thought in our day. Information is thought to be knowledge. Do I cut it out? Do we jump to conclusion? Okay. Conclusion. In this description above, it is possible to regard wisdom as the essence of an area, meaning those hakim, wise persons, create the knowledge and information of that area by basing themselves on the essence of wisdom. A similar process occurs in the formation of religion. The Prophet formed knowledge and information in conveying the religion by moving off of wisdom. But due to later periods where wisdom could not be considered independently from the wise person, only information and knowledge were left. In these types of disciplines, the pile-up of information began to obstruct the capacity to see the wisdom of that area, because an understanding that regarded transferring already present information as being ilm and sagacity emerged. We can evaluate all the sages that were mentioned in the description that was given for the titles of Hikmah as those scholars who brought the information of that area to the level of wisdom. We can give Abu Hanifah's application of the istihsan method to fiqh as an example of this. Becoming a method used in this tradition of fiqh, istihsan is the faqih judging through a justification that they are aware of rather than a decree that comes to mind first. In short, istihsan is the method whereby the mujtahid, using evidence based on ijma, necessity, custom, maslaha, secret analogy, makes a judgment that is better suited to the purpose of the law rather than the accepted rule or the first solution that comes to mind. We cannot consider this method independent of the hakim of the area. Because the person who is cognizant of this wisdom is someone who has reached the level of wisdom, it would be difficult to claim that someone who has not reached this level could engage in istihsan based solely on information. We can interpret Abu Hanifah's Fiqh al-Akbar, which contains the fundamentals of Islamic belief, as an expressible part of wisdom. But there is also an unexpressed part of this wisdom, and it is only present in the knowledgeable person. Someone else can understand this by reaching the level of the sagacious. They have not received this in a written form because it cannot be expressed. We can mention Ghazali's views expressed in his work such as Al-Iqtisad fil Itiqad, Al-Munqiz, Al-Iljam al-Awam as examples of theological wisdom. Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd can be regarded as sages representative of philosophical wisdom. Ibn Arabi can be shown as the wisdom of irfan, gnosis, while Rumi is the representative of wisdom in ashq, passionate love. Because wisdom is described as something that is suitable to the truth, all of the names mentioned above are those who have views that are suitable to truth based on their respective areas. This knowledge at the level of wisdom in that area has a synergy that fits with the others. This harmony occurs when someone tries to judge other areas by information without possessing the wisdom level of the information of that area. In conclusion, today's Islamic thought has lost its wisdom, going far back into the past. What is mentioned about religious thought are news and rumors at the level of information. News and rumors do not make their relayer a scholar. They only create partisans who do or do not believe in the information. The mental atrophy that spreads and gains strength in these environments, not nurtured from depths, is ta'assub. Thank you.
The floor is yours, Dr. Tanaka.
I'm afraid that you are bored to see my face because this is my third appearance on this presentation. And so, I'd like to talk about the general trend of Islamic and Sufi studies in Japan. And this presentation is a very practical one. I'd like to share some information about the present situation of Islamic and Sufi studies in Japan. Here's the contents. It is divided into 4 parts. First, I'd like to talk about Islamic studies and Middle East studies in Japan. As for the Islamic study itself, we don't have exact statistics. So now I'd like to utilize the survey of Japan Association for Middle East Studies. It was conducted in 2002, 2005, 2011, and 2014. And so, as for the disciplines of the Japan Association for Middle East Studies members, the striking characteristics is that the most, 1/3 of the scholars are majoring history. Their special discipline is history, historical studies. And the second group comes the social sciences, including area studies, anthropology, and international relations. And the third group is composed of, again, human sciences, excluding history. It is composed of language, philosophy, and literature. And this survey was conducted in 2011, newer one, but the tendency almost the same. As for the generation, the members of this association was originally 322 when it was established in 1985, but in this year it's almost 700. And as for the generation, about more than 60% are under 54. So I'm excluded from this younger generation. But as for the Japanese research institutes, these are the statistics of the research and educational institutes. The left one is showing the undergraduate institutes, and the middle one is masters, and the right one is doctors. So the total number of institutes are giving something about Islamic or Middle East studies is about 90, and master's course about more than 50, 60, and the doctoral course between 30 and 40. And as for the disciplines of the undergraduate students, again, the history comes the first place, and then the social sciences like area studies and international relations, and then comes the religious studies and the languages. And the characteristics here is that our weakness in science and technology, and also science and technology can be maybe understandable, but also psychology is missing in this field in Japan. As for the graduate students, almost the same tendency. It has almost the same tendency. Why it moves automatically, I don't understand. But anyway, so the ratio of the disciplines are is almost the same as that of JAMES members. So we can say that we are reproducing the knowledge in this field of research. I'd like to give you one information about research tools to investigate the Japanese studies. As you know, you have the catalog of the Japanese studies on Sufi studies, Japanese Sufism, Tariqa saint worship. But this is the database on the Middle East studies and Islamic studies in general, not only Sufi studies. And so database library catalog using both Arabic and so this is about the books you can find in the Japanese libraries. So we have many Arabic books. For example, in this Kyoto University, only in our university we have more than 25,000 Arabic books, including some manuscripts. And as for the bibliographical database of Middle Eastern studies and Islamic studies in Japan, from 1868, after the Meiji Restoration until now, now it is more than 20,000 entries. At the moment of 2007, it was 19,000, and it's still continuing, still ongoing. And so titles and authors' names are both written in Japanese and alphabet. And this database, so you can access through the Latin alphabet to the data. So this database is available at the website of Japan Association of Middle East Studies, and the Toyo Bunko means Oriental Library, which is located in Tokyo. Now, this is the number of the records included in the Middle East Studies database. So now it's, so the left side is the number of the records. So it's more than 2,000 something. And so now I'd like to move on to the area studies in Japan. First, I'd like to introduce our area studies at Kyoto University. I am belonging to the Graduate School of Asian and African Area Studies, and its aim is the interdisciplinary research. But the area studies of Kyoto University is very unique because it is the combination of not only humanities and social sciences, but also with natural sciences, including environmental studies and agricultural studies. And also in Japan in general, we have been conducting area studies program in Japan supported by the government. And so we are conducting the multidisciplinary and comparative approached program. And so we have already finished 3 stages of Islamic area studies. The first stage began in 1997, and the third one ended in the last year. And now we have begun a new one, New Area Studies Project for the Modern Middle East. It will be held in 6 years. And this time, in this program, we include the one center. We are made of 5 centers, but one center is specializing the natural sciences, especially the mining studies for the oil in the Middle East and so on. And as for the publications from these governmental area studies, actually it was published from the Center for Islamic Area Studies at Kyoto University. And this is the catalog for the printed books of the School of Ibn Arabi collected in Japanese libraries. And the second one is the Glossary of Sufism, Tariqa, and Saint Cult. It is Arabic, Persian, Ottoman Turkish, Malay, Swahili, and so on, and Japanese translation, with the Japanese translations. And the third one is Islamic thought and culture during the Ottoman period. This also includes the original texts in Arabic, Persian, Ottoman Turkish, and its the Japanese translation. Now I'd like to move on to the survey on Sufi studies in Japan. I will show you several graphs, and all of them are included in the yellow booklet which you have in your black bag. As for the ratio of disciplines, as for the Sufi studies, as for Sufism, you can easily imagine that metaphysical approach is dominant, whereas Tariqa studies in Japan, the history and anthropology are competing with each other, but history is relatively dominant. And as for saint studies, as Professor Akahori mentioned in the morning, anthropology is dominant. And the transition according to disciplines, as for the Sufism first, you can see that in the first days, 19, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60s, literature studies were, please close the, Anyway, so the literature studies were competing with metaphysical studies. So it was one of the dominant approaches. But after 70s, it's decreasing. And now only the metaphysical approach is dominant in Sufi studies. Next comes the Tariqa studies. As you see, in 1950s, 60s, 70s, historical studies were dominant, and 1990 also historical studies are dominant. And only after 2000, I mean the 21st century, anthropology is competing historical studies. And then come the saint veneration studies. In the old days, when it began in the 1960s, most of them were historical studies. But from 1980s, anthropology is dominant in the study of saint veneration. And in total, you can see such a tendency, and the blue one is literature, so it was one of the dominant elements in the first days, but it's decreasing, and metaphysics are stable, almost 50%, and both historical studies and anthropology are developing in the number. And as for the ratio of disciplines, according to areas, I will show you very shortly. For example, the sub-Saharan African case, we have very few metaphysical studies because we don't have many manuscripts. So instead, we have many anthropological studies in this field. But on the contrary, for example, in China, because we have many manuscripts, we have many books inherited, that's why a metaphysical research is dominant in Japan. And then comes the ratio of topics according to areas. Here you can easily see that sub-Saharan Africa and Central Asia, we have very few Sufi studies. Instead, it's full of Tariqa studies and some saint worship, saint veneration studies. And then in total, now I have the graph, how many percent of the researches were treating the pre-modern and modern period. In the former days, the pre-modern period was the main target of our study in Japan, but these days, the modern and the contemporary era are starting to become the main target of the research. I'd like to skip these. And lastly, I'd like to mention our joint research group on Sufism and saint veneration, including Tariqa. In the morning, Professor Akahori already mentioned this joint research, and it was founded in 1997. So our aim is interdisciplinary and cross-regional or inter-regional approach. And so there are some international workshops we had held, and there are some special issues on academic journals which we have produced. And this is bibliography, mainly on the present situation of the Middle East studies. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
So we have a few minutes for questions. Does anyone have a question for one of the speakers? Bruce?
I appreciate your distinction. This is Bruce Lawrence. I appreciate your distinction and discussion of all the different disciplines and approaches to Sufism in Japan. I wondered if you could comment a little bit more on one discipline you didn't discuss in your very brief but insightful paper, and that is architecture. So how does architecture come up and what role does it play? And that's the easy question. Now the harder one is, where do you stop pre-modern and begin modern? And is that flexible as is the definition of Sufism?
Thank you very much for your question. As for the Sufi studies, of course, we have very few architectural studies. But in the case of tariqas, especially because there are many mausoleums to be investigated, we have architectural researches. For example, in the case of saints, almost 20% are the research, the articles on architecture. Still okay for you.
What is the difference between pre-modern and modern?
Mostly, investigation was conducted recently, but the targets are the pre-modern. For example, Mughal period also.
What is the year when you cut off the modern? When is the modern?
Oh yes. This is hypothetical definition. Pre-modern is in this statistics. Pre-modern means up to the end of 18th century, and the modern comes from the beginning of 19th century. The turning point is the invasion, Napoleon's invasion of Egypt.
1798.
Sorry?
You said 1798.
1798, yes.
Meiji
So,
period, mostly. Meiji period.
No, much earlier than Meiji period. Yes, and Meiji period began in 1868, and the demarcation line is in 1798 or something. Thank you.
Other questions?
You said the Middle East will be inclusive in the recent 5 centers united work for 6 years. You mentioned that the new group of centers united for 6 years to do certain works about the Middle East and focusing about particularly oil sources. I was curious about water. Well, will you be inclusive of water resources as well?
Actually, at the moment, our friends institute doesn't have any intention to investigate concentrate on water, but I'd like to suggest them to do so. Thank you very much for your suggestion.
Yes, in the back. Yes. Yeah. To the.
Yes, thank you. I really enjoyed all 4 papers, but I have 2 quick questions to Professor Carl Ernst. I work on modern Sufism in modern Egypt, and then when I heard your paper, and especially Bernier's description of so-called fakirs in the context of 17th century, it seemed like a duplicate of Rashid Rida's criticism of Sufism, right? So one question is, I just wonder, you had mentioned in your paper how these earlier works, description of Sufism, had impact on later generation of academics writing about Sufism in terms of vocabulary, expressions, etc. Whether any of the reformist thinkers in later period, whether in some continent or Central Asia or the Middle East, have ever been exposed to this kind of argument? That's the first question. And the second question is that, Barnier and others are so critical of Sufism. Are they also critical of Islam in general, or just Sufism? That's the 2 questions.
Well, that's a wonderful point that you make, and I don't think we have the evidence yet, but people like Rashid Rida and Muhammad Abduh before him were reading Orientalist literature, we know that. But I don't think we have a good index of the translations that were being made into Arabic. But I I can tell you that in the case of Iran, we know the Iranians are obsessed with what people write about them. And so all of these texts have been translated into Persian for quite some time. So I think this is an important area for looking into reflexivity and people being affected by the writings that are translated, or at least engaging with them. You ask about the impressions of Islam in general. These are not very positive, but Chardin actually has translated more or less into French a Shi'i theological handbook. And so it was actually a source of information from a certain point of view. And I think Sir John Malcolm took a similar position when he was in Persia. He had some mujtahids who were informing him from a Shi'i point of view, but they also helped to form their negative view of Sufism, because the Shi'i establishment in Safavid Persia was very hostile to the Sufi institutions. So the approach to Islam was suspicious and showed the same kind of sloppiness that their other interactions demonstrated. And these were the most literate of the travelers. So the standard was highly questionable.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question. Yes, in the back.
Me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Sisi Pir. I'm a student of Cemal Nursargut and attending from Zurich, Switzerland. My question actually is for Professor Küçük, who's not here. So Osman Abla, maybe you can help. In the paper, so let's do the clarification first, and then we can do the interpretation. In the paper, there was a triangle. I couldn't capture the three parts. What were they? There was knowledge, information, something else, Osman Ablacığım.
There are two triangles he had drawn here. There is one is an upside down triangle, and there is Ihsan at the top, Iman in the middle, and Islam at the bottom.
At the bottom.
So this, but the other one he has drawn is a normal triangle, where there is wisdom at the bottom, knowledge in the middle, and there's information at top.
Okay, this is the one I wanted to refer to. So last week I was at the World Technology Conference with some academic and business leaders, and I was presenting. We discussed about this particularly, where we live in an information age. We have the information and we have the practice on one side, but somehow we have a challenge in bringing two together. So there are a lot of professors in the room. I'm looking for some inspiration. How are you interpreting what Dr. Küçük is trying to say? Maybe we can learn from you.
Astaghfirullah. Well, I read the paper with a lot of respect, because I think I agree that today's problem is information without wisdom, and that brings ta'assub, and that's a major problem in Islam right now, and it has been ever since Ghazali's period, as obviously written here. So I think in a very nice manner, Professor Küçük emphasizes that you need wisdom to make information knowledge. And those wise men are born like that sometimes. Sometimes they are taught to be wise, but it's an insight that comes with you. That's what I understand. But we have all the teachers here, so would you like to comment on that?
Just one thing that I would like to add. John Lennon says in one of his songs. Just one song I would like to add. John Lennon says that if you need information, go to police station. So, what we are seeking for, if we need information, information is not equivalent to knowledge. Knowledge is something is flourish, comes out from your inner self. But the information which you are acquiring from outside by reading, by listening, by watching, all of them are with 5 senses we are collecting. But the wisdom comes after the knowledge, and so there's a different levels of degrees of knowledge, we may say.
So I think at this point we all need some tea.
That's a good information.